Okay. All right. I'm Ann Holmes, and I'm here to talk about facilities and administrative cost calculation. I want you to all be with me for just one moment. And this explanation, we're going to go to Ann's world, and we're going to do it in a way that's, I call my Ann's Any Idiot Guide. When you do the indirect cost calculation, what happens is the university closes its fiscal year, or the hospital or the nonprofit, wherever you work. And what they do is there are accountants that are in the controller's office, usually they're cost accountants, who pull all the expenses for 1 year, the one fiscal year, and they bring it in and they put it in what we're going to represent with this bucket of water. Okay, so I've taken all the expenses. Did I say revenue? Did I say tuition? No, it's just the expenses. So what happens is they take these expenses in, and then what they have to do is they have to go through those expenses, and based on the object codes or your journal entries or how you pay the payroll, the first thing they have to do is take out what the government specifically says are unallowable costs. So an unallowable cost, can anybody name one?
Alcohol.
Alcohol, that's a good one. So anytime there's a party at your campus, even if you charge it on an account, they have to take those unallowable costs out. Other costs we discussed yesterday. Anybody remember one? No, that's a good cost. Lobbying. Remember we talked about lobbying? You weren't allowed to lobby. So most of our universities have lobbying sections that work with state and federal government. We have to take off those costs. We also have to take off the kind of costs that advertise our universities. And any airport you go through, any stadium, you always see, come to the University of whatever. You'll be really, really smart. You know that kind of advertising? The government says that can't be part of it. So they take out all these expenses that they know are specifically unallowable, and frankly there's quite a few of them, and they move them off to the side. Okay, they're out of the calculation. The next thing they do, using those same codes, and if you'll notice up here on the screen that the buckets are kind of designed out, okay? So what they do is they take and they first have to move them into, into these buckets over here, which is what the university does. We teach some, we do some research, we do other sponsored activities where somebody gives us funds, but it's not necessarily research, and we do some other institutional activities. Anybody want to guess what other institutional activities are?
Symposiums.
Football. Okay, there you go. Okay, so we have those things. So the first thing is instruction. And what goes into instruction? The first thing it goes into is our professor's salary, our teaching assistants, any materials they may buy for instruction. So anything that's coded to instruction goes in the first bucket. And hopefully, and depending on your university, if you're a Research 1 institution, relatively this may go up or down, but if you're a predominantly undergraduate, this would be the largest bucket at all. So the first thing we have is instruction. So we have instruction over here. The next thing we do is they take the organized research dollars. What's organized research? A21 or A122 defines that as separately paid and accounting for, including what you do in your departments. So if you'll notice at your institutions that all your federal awards have you can always identify them, maybe by a certain code number, are you agreeing? Or your state awards might have another one. Well, they know what they are. So they pull all the expenses associated with those sponsored program and they put them in another bucket or another cost pool, as it were. So that's organized research. Other sponsored activities. Anybody want to guess what they are? Okay, it's things that somebody pays us to do, but not necessarily research. For example, maybe training grants, maybe some of our public service activities that we do as outreach, training, the arts. We support the Fine Arts Department for the National Endowments for the Arts. Do you understand what I'm talking about? So somebody pays us, but they're not research, okay? Relatively smaller amount. We put that in a bucket. And the last thing is other institutional activities. It's dorm rooms. it's the dining halls, and it's football, okay? So, as you can imagine, depending if you're in the Midwest, I've been out there, okay? Football's pretty big. Okay, so there you go, there's football. So that's what we do at universities. We've done all that, we've put those expenses out. But most of you in this room are listening to this tape. The expense for you is not poured out yet, because you're not one of the direct costs for that. You're a facilities and administrative costs. So now we have to take what's remaining in the bucket, and if you look on the other side of the screen, what we have to do is now say, this is what we do at our institution, and this is all the people, places, and things to make it happen. Okay? So now, the first one is depreciation and use expense. Nobody understands that except accountants, so we're just going to put that out there, okay? All right, now, the next one is operations and maintenance. Anybody want to guess what's in there? Physical. Air conditioning, lights, telephones. No, maybe not telephones, but air conditioning, lights, the custodian, the people that shovel the snow, the sidewalks, the flowers, all that stuff that it just takes to keep the university up and running. Frankly, that's a very, very, very expensive part of running any of our institutions. Okay, so that we have operations and maintenance. The next thing is the library. Anybody want to guess? The books, the librarians, the students working in there, the computers in the library, the subscriptions, all of that stuff, that gets poured in this bucket. Relative to the other, it's a very small amount. Okay, general and administration, sometimes you'll hear this called the GA pool. What's in there? Anybody want to throw out a guess? General, administrative? Staff. So what kind of staff? Where do they work? Payroll. Payroll, business office, procurement, not student affairs, part of your controller's office, your president, probably part of your provost expense. You see, that's the general administrative people that work for the entire campus. All right? Next thing, departmental administration. How many of you say you work in a department? You feel yourself about to be poured in here? Okay, so, all right, what's in this bucket? Name some stuff. Of whom? Department administrative staff, your chairs, your deans, the pencils in the supply cabinet, the paper, the copier, the telephones on your desk, the computers on your desk. The second highest bucket relative to expenses, and there you go, that's departmental administrative. Okay? Everybody clear on what we're doing? Sponsored project administration. Anybody want to guess? Us. How many people said they're central administrators? Here you go. I've seen your salaries. Not taking, okay, no, okay. Okay, so this is your pre-award office, your post-award office, your intellectual property office, compliance office, part of your controller's office, the accounting nerd that's doing this calculation. You get what I'm saying? So there you are, the pens and paper and pencil on your desk. Okay, so that's your sponsored project administration. And the last but not least is student services. Student services are your registrations office, your records office, those kind of things. Relatively to the rest of it, it's done. Now, this bucket is empty. It really isn't, but pretend it is. Okay, so now, I've poured out all the expenses that it takes to run a university. They're all in a pool, a cost pool they call it, okay? Now my job is, I have to take these expenses and I have to say, how do I fairly allocate the cost of doing what we do to the things that we do? And let me put it another way. Based on these expenses, should tuition go up? Should the indirect cost calculation go up? Should it cost more to run a play? Or should football tickets cost more? Okay? That's what I'm saying. So now, how do we do that? Well, there's a couple different methods, but the one I think that strikes and hit home the most and is easiest for me to understand is They do it by the space survey. Has anybody ever heard of the space survey? Okay, there's groans in the audience. You can tell they've been assigned that. Now, traditionally, I know a lot of you in the room are new, traditionally the space survey is given to the person who started yesterday, okay? So what happens is, if you ever notice at your institution or you go in any hospital, every single door has a number on it, 102, 3, 4, 6. Why? Not just so people can find it, but so that they can do this space survey. And what happens is, in your facilities office, somebody has a layout of every single building on your campus, every single room number, okay? And then I'm going to make it simple, but each building has a person who's in charge of doing the space survey. And what their job is, these highly trained people who have been told the importance of this, that started yesterday, their job is to walk through the space and say what goes on here. Is this a classroom that's used for instruction? Or is this a lab that's used to do some instruction and some research? Okay, so you literally walk the floors. So they walk the floors and they get down here and they say, here's a classroom, that's 100% instruction. Another classroom, 100% instruction. It's a lab. It's Professor Really Smart's lab. What goes on here? Well, I know he teaches some classes in there, but then he shares it with Professor Mrs. Really Smart, and they have a big research project going on. So what happens is, you have to try to figure out what's going on in there. And what you'll do is they'll say, well, I think it's 50-50 research and instruction. We've all gotten more sophisticated in this recently, so we'll take that 50% and say, okay, I say it's 50% research. Tell me the names or the account numbers of the research awards going on in that room, okay? You'll hear that if in accounting terms they talk about matching the space to the base. Tell me the account numbers, space to the base. So you go through and you do that. And in all seriousness, trainings at universities have gotten better. People try to be as accurate as they can. So they take that space up, and some of people still do it manually. Most of us have computerized systems now. So if I were the space person in my office, I would go back in and say, I've done the space, and based on this, I said this lab was 50-50, classroom, classroom, classroom. I send it over there, and somebody calculates the square footage that I said I did for research, okay? This is all brought in together. In geography, now let me take another one. In arts and literature and Roman literature, how much space do you think goes for research? Yeah, like 2 feet, I don't know. But if you're in the engineering building, whoa, okay? So it's gonna vary a lot by department. So what happens is, after it's all combined, and remember I'm oversimplifying this, but after it's all combined, somebody goes in and they say, all right, we've done our calculation, and based on this calculation of our highly trained, skilled people out in the field, knowing what the definitions of all those things are, we have calculated at the University of NCURA, a Research One institution, because it will matter, 23% of the space in here is used for research, okay? So now, let's go back to our diagram. Forget depreciation and maintenance, but this bucket was the bucket I poured for operation and maintenance. Now, if I just told you that 23% of the space on campus is used for research, how much of the electricity bill should research pay? 23%. See, we have the smart people here today, okay? 23%, so you take about a quarter of that and you put it in the bucket, okay? Because now this bucket's now my research costs. So I go down and I say the library. The library, they try to do it on usage. This is a little bit more difficult because who knows how you're using libraries anymore, because frankly, most students do what? They Google now, or they look at the collections online. So there's a calculation based on number of students. It's pretty complicated, but a lot of the library expense obviously is for research, okay? And I don't mean the students' research, I mean the scientists' research, because that's where our subscriptions are going through and that kind of thing. General and administrative. These other ones, oh, here's something. Notice that all the bottom ones begin with what word? The bottom ones over here, what word they begin with? Administration. The A in the F&A. Okay? So when you get to the administrative, the general administrative, what they do is they can't do it by space, but they do it by percentages of people. How are you coded? Do you notice all of your research professors have a different code in your accounting system than a teaching professor? That's how they do it. So based on those percentage of how the people go, they take and they say the general administrative is equal to, I don't know, make the percentage up, but they put some of the percentages over there, okay? Now, departmental administrative. Same thing, but they do it department by department, because remember our arts and literature we think had like no research going on, but in our engineering school it's huge, okay? So they get to departmental administration, frankly, you have a significant amount of departmental administration going in here, okay? Now, I'm going to run out of room in this water thing, but we're just going to go with the flow. Now, I get to sponsored project administration. How much of the Office of Sponsored Projects do you think research should pay for? All of it. It's not quite all of it, because remember that other sponsored activities like the training stuff, we need some money for that. So if I could pour 90% of this into here, I would. But you get the picture, right? And then lastly, Student Services Administration. It's a tiny little bit that have to do with our grad students, okay? So you get what I did. I went through and I said, here's what we do, here's what it takes to do it, and based on the instructions in A21, I allocated the cost. This is the cost of doing research, right? Then simply what they do, remember my buckets here. This was instruction. That's too low. This was instruction. This was research. That becomes the denominator in our equation. That's the lower number. Here's the large number. What it costs to do on our versus our research. Can you switch that slide for me? That's our indirect cost calculation, and it's demonstrated right here. Okay? Here's the facilities, the lights, the electricity, depreciation, and administrative. Our procurement office, our sponsored project office, our departmental administration, over the base that they talked about, which is how they do the research, okay, the research dollars. And that is your indirect cost rate. Any questions? Now, the problem here is how many people in the audience have ever heard their professor say, I shouldn't pay indirect costs because I don't use it? Okay? And my response to that professor is, are the lights on over there? Hey, the telephone's working. It's those kinds of expenses, okay? That's the important part. When you're trying to explain this to a professor, you have to think of it as if you had a business, what would it cost for you to do a business? You'd need administrative people, you'd need accountants, you better get a lawyer. You'd need probably tax advice, you'd need to pay your rent, you'd need to pay electricity, you need to pay the person that's going to buy the things for you. These are the expenses that go into that F&A calculation. But it's a negotiation. You're going to hear it talked about as a negotiation, because here's what happens. Can you go to the next slide, please? The first thing that happens is, under regulations that I think happened in 1993, the government looked at our indirect costs and said, listen, that administrative piece, remember all the buckets that ended with A? I don't care what your calculation is, we are never paying you more than 26%. Okay? What's your indirect cost rate for off-campus at your institution? Oh, everybody's 26, almost, okay? Ever wonder why? It's not a coincidence. It's because that's what the cap is. So in this calculation for our fictional NCURA University, even though we counted those A's to be 28.58%, the government says, sorry, we're only giving you 26, okay? So that's a cap, and that's why most of our off-campus rates are 26%. Now, if you go to the bottom, look what takes the most money. It's operation and maintenance. It's the gas and electric bill. This will vary. When you see big variances in people's indirect cost rate, most of it are because of this category. In the Northeast, it is extremely expensive to heat buildings. Land is expensive. Okay? You'll see those rates higher. So what happens down here is they calculate that, and in this one, it says this is 30%. So you take the 26% administrative, you add it to the facilities, and you get 56. But really what happens is it becomes a negotiation. And the federal government comes in and it wants to negotiate this with you, and it wants to make sure it calculated correctly. Do you think they spend a lot of time up here looking at your costs that you put in those buckets? No, because it's already capped, you're already over. Even if they found you made a little bit of a mistake, it's not going to fall below 26%. So where do you think they spend their time? Down here. Right. So they spend it and they start to look at operation and maintenance. Now, how did I divide that into the bucket, remember? How did I decide? Space survey, right. So they do the space survey. So what they do is they look at that survey that somebody filled out, and they go out and visit those departments. And which ones do you think they go to?
Engineering.
Engineering. The ones with the nice round numbers. You know, remember when you were a kid and you took a test and you go, oh, I haven't had a C for a while, I'll put C, okay? Those people that walk in and they're like, I haven't had a 50-50 for a while, so I'll put 50-50 or 7. When it starts to look all even like that, they might be interested in talking to you. And they literally go to those labs. If you have graduate students in there, they'll interview them. The first thing they'll do is note that the graduate student was doing their homework. And you counted this lab space as 100% research. Well, that can't be. So they start deducting from that. So you begin a negotiation, and the negotiation can go on for months. I haven't seen it years, but frankly there probably is, but months. And what happens is you finally agree on a price with the university, and you get your indirect cost rate, which for most of us will last for about 3 years. Any questions? That's it. Thank you.